So this presentation is on the reflections on theory and practice for the 5 theories and methodologies that I chose to discuss for this presentation. And let's get into them. So the first theory or methodology that I chose to discuss was backward design, and we'll just begin with what it is. So backward design is when an instructor first considers and identifies the learning goals of the course. Then they begin to consider the assessments, which is when they determine acceptable evidence and the resources that they'll use, and then they start to plan and create assignments and instruction based on the first 2 parts of this. It's focused primarily on student learning and understanding, and is an effective way of providing guidance for instruction and designing lessons, units, and courses, and is beneficial for both the students and the instructors, even if the students don't realize that is what the instructors did. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about backward design in my course specifically. So I started the design of my class with my MLOs and CLOs, of course. And here you can see my Module 1 learning outcomes and then my Module 2 learning outcomes and both of their descriptions, which is at the very beginning of both of the modules. And I really wanted to know what I wanted my target learners to get out of the class. So that's, of course, what I started with. And then I began to brainstorm about assessments and lessons. And that's when after that, I finally began the draft process of my course, and then obviously I of course finished with the revisions of my course at the end of it all. So the second thing that I'll be talking about is communities of practice, and I'll start again with what it is. So communities of practice are groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and learn how to do it better as they interact regularly, as said by Mr. David. Here is an image of 2 ants carrying 1 apple working together to get the desired result. And there's 3 main components of communities of practice, which is domain, community, and practice, which I will talk about further in the next slide. So the domains are, the first part is the domain, of course. There must be a shared domain of interest that creates an identity for the group. So there must be a shared passion that everybody within the group shares. And then community, there has to be a group of people, it cannot just be one person, that has a shared interest or a passion, and those people together create the community. And these people, they have to be willing to work with the other people within their community that have the same passion as them. And the practice is that there has to be an interaction between the community members beyond just a conversation, which is what makes them the practitioners. It has to be things such as like sharing resources or experiences, telling stories, or helping one another through a problem they might have with that thing. And then I'm going to talk about communities of practice in my course, which I created. Well, I knew I wanted my class to be a place where my target learners could really come together and learn more about how the daycare works and all of the work that goes into running it. Some things like creating field trips over the summer or making their own parent communication forms or budget sheets, things like that. So with that in mind, I created this course cafe within my class. It's underneath Module 2 on the sidebar. And it's really a place for my students to go and share resources or tips or any questions they may have with their peers, which is what I would consider my communities of practice within my course. The third thing I'll be talking about is Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy is a classification of the different objectives and skills that educators set for their students, which is their learning objectives. It has these 6 components, these 6 tiers to them, which is at the bottom, remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and finally create. It's extremely beneficial for both instructors for one reason. For both instructors and students. For one reason, it keeps the course and objectives organized, and it keeps everything nicely organized. So in my course, here in Understand, I provided some links for them to go through and really understand better, of course, what they should know for the class and what they should know for the assignments that they'll be working on. And then for Apply, I'm having them apply what they learned here into these assignments. So they'll apply things like where they'll be going, and then they'll be applying the information about where they'll be going into these assignments. Furthermore, I have Create and Evaluate. Create is, for an example, for my parent communication, I have a blank document where they will have to fill it out based on their own personal field trip that they've created. So they're creating their own parent communication form. And I have a few more assignments like these, like here with the logistics and budget assignment, and then they're going to create their own portfolio using this website that I provided for them. And then evaluating, they're thinking of a situation and then evaluating what they would have to do and thinking about the things that they've learned from the resources that I provided. For this, I did my best to include most of the tiers in Bloom's taxonomy into my course. However, I obviously utilized some better than others, and I put some above others. For example, remember at the bottom, I really did not call on my learners to remember anything, even though it would have been a good way for them to get started into the class. But at the top of the tier, Create, I really put that above others, and I have them throughout the assignments create their own parent forums and budget assignments and field trips and things like that. So I really went above for some and below for others. For rubrics. So rubrics are very interesting to me, as you'll hear about later. They are a tool that articulates the expectations for an assignment by listing criteria, and for each criteria, describing levels of quality. So here I have an example rubric for a mind map assignment where you can see 5 is obviously where they did the best, 4, 3, 2, 1. So the student for this class would have a chance at 15 points, or none, of course. And they're used in almost all classes to give a guideline to students about how they work and how they'll be graded, and they really benefit both the students and the teachers in numerous amounts of ways. Some ways that they benefit teachers is there's less time spent on grading and more time for teaching and instruction and things like that, and it gives a lot of consistency in grading, which is a great thing for students as well, and it allows them to provide their students with feedback in a way that does not take up an immense amount of time. They can really just highlight it and then go, and it kind of explains itself why they were given that grade, and if the students want to question it, they can, but it really kind of explains itself. The benefits for students, they know and understand the expectations that are set for them, and it gives them a baseline to create their work off of, and it really allows them to reflect on their work based on the responses given by the teacher in the rubric. And then once they have that, they can improve their work for the future. They're not necessary in my course, but I still believe that they're an essential part. And actually, when I had my target learners reviewing my course, I have a college student, and she emphasized just how important rubrics are. While it wasn't something that she needed to talk about, she did talk about them, and I'm really glad that she did bring it up and bring it to my attention, because before I hadn't really thought about how important rubrics were, and I always put them on the back burner and never thought about them, but I'm glad that she brought it to my attention so I can now know for my next classes. So next I'll be talking about a flipped classroom and what that is. A flipped classroom is when students gain first exposure to new material outside of class, usually via reading or lecture videos, and then use class time to do the harder work of assimilating that knowledge, perhaps through problem-solving, discussion, or debates. So as you can see, the traditional classroom, you'll have your lecture in class, and then you'll go home and you'll do your homework, which is something that we've grown up doing. But for a flipped classroom, you'll actually watch the lecture. The students will watch the lecture online, or they'll read resources that they need for the lecture online. And then in the classroom is when they'll do all of the work, and they have more time with the teacher to get a better understanding. If they have questions on anything, they'll have more time for questions and things like that. Some key elements of a flipped classroom, there's 4. So first you're going to want to give your students the opportunity to really learn about a flipped classroom before indulging into one. So giving things out like pamphlets and brochures, and then also informing parents, especially if you're in K through 12, it's vital that you tell parents so they know what's going on in the classroom and they don't feel like you're putting something onto their children that aren't going to benefit them. And then secondly, you give students an instructional tool or resource to prepare for class. And then you give students an assessment at the beginning of the class to determine their understanding of the material from the night before. So this could be you give them a little tiny pop quiz to see how they did, or if they understood the material, or you require that they take notes on the lessons, and at the beginning of class you go through and you look at everybody's notes to make sure that they're actually reviewing the material and that they understand. And then finally, the 4th is that you will provide in-class activities that deepen their understanding and focus on higher cognitive levels. So in class you'll give harder assignments that they can work together on, or they can work alone on, but assignments that you'll be there to help them with that will deepen their understanding of the material they learned the night before. Flipped classroom, actually, for my course, it would be nearly impossible to implement a flipped classroom as it's online. But since I work with my target learners, I potentially could record my instructions and record the information that I gave them in Word form, and then have them watch those videos, and I could talk to them about it in person and have them and work with them for the assignments and just talk with them about those kinds of things. But actually, I have implemented a flipped classroom in a class before, I believe the year before this one, in the 2016-2017 school year, and it was extremely beneficial for the students. The students in my class just had a lack of interest in the things that were going on, and I was a long-term substitute for a teacher that had to leave. And so I was given these basic bland lesson plans, and I was told to just give those to the students, but I saw their grades dropping, so I knew that there had to be something to do. And I actually learned about flipped classrooms in one of my classes here at Ashford, and I thought, well, maybe this could work. And so I started to make pamphlets and whatnot for the flipped classroom. I started to research more and make little information guides, and I gave it to the students. And then I had a parent conference night where I talked to all the parents about it, and I set up a Remind app, and I gave them information, and I gave them a place to email me or text me any questions they have, and I talked with the parents, and then finally I implemented it. It took a long time, but whenever I did, it was actually very beneficial. So I really enjoy the idea of a flipped classroom. It's just not something that would be useful in an online class, of course. And those were my 5. So I hope you enjoyed learning about them. I hope I gave some great information, and thank you.